So we have seen a little bit of controversy in the wake of the French Grand Prix from Le Mans in the form of a war of words, for lack of a better term, maybe a little spat between Pecco Bagnaia and Gas Tech-Toi La mer boss Herve Poncharal. The whole thing has come about Herve's response to comments made by Pecco Bagnaia about the current state of MotoGP and the competitiveness of the satellite teams and satellite riders. And it is one of those ones where people, I don't know, like to get riled up a little bit in this way that Herve has regarding the comments from Pecco. I saw so many disapproving reactions from people, comments, just things in little discussions on Twitter, in certain groups and things like that, about Pecco being a big, big baby. And then some headlines from, like I mentioned, Herve's response there, which he was quite scathing about what Pecco has said. So I thought I'd just come in here and give my thoughts on it. The reason I've really started to look into this one is because I came across an article by one Simon Patterson, MotoGP journalist for the race website, titled Decoding MotoGP's Unexpected Champion versus Team Boss Row. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I'm aware that Simon Patterson is not the most popular MotoGP journalist. And to be honest with you, I don't often click on his articles. I do find sometimes, and I have listened to the race podcast a few times, where sometimes I'm just like, he's surely just winding us up here. So I get why people are a little bit funny on him. I have nothing against him personally, but I do think sometimes maybe he's just a bit of a hot take merchant, I suppose, that he just likes, but he gets a response out of people. He gets a lot of negative comments as well. People get outraged by it. But yeah, the reason that this article in particular caught my attention was my instinct is usually that people are overreacting. My instinct is always, he probably didn't say that. And I've got to say, I think I agree with Simon Patterson. Now, like I mentioned, take this with a pinch of salt, because I obviously went into this with the mindset that people are probably misquoting him, or it's probably been taken out of context. That's my natural instinct when I see this kind of stuff. So maybe I'm just supporting my own initial thoughts here with bias. I don't know. You tell me. But I'm going to tell you how I see it now that I have looked into it. Now, we'll get into what Pecco and Herve have actually said here. But first, I want to take a quick look at Simon Patterson's article at what he has said about the situation. In his article, he states, rather than suggesting that there need to be a clear performance differential between the current factory and satellite bikes on the grid, Bagnaia more seemed to be trying to explain his point with some historical analogy, something that may well have got lost during the multiple retellings and translations of the story before it reached Poncharal for his comments. While Poncharal suggested Bagnaia is somehow demanding that satellite bikes be slowed down significantly, the reality of his comments is quite different. And I guess this is where I agree with Simon. The reality, I believe, is quite different. I've watched it, the whole thing. It's on MotoGP YouTube channel. You can go find it. Pecco, his whole response to this question from this Italian journalist. I've also gone onto their website and read the transcript of the question that was asked and his response to it. Translated by that website, there's a thing at the bottom you can press read it in English rather than Italian. Now, the original question directed towards Pecco was about safety. The whole conversation all starts by talking about his incident with Viñales. I will link to Simon Patterson's article, the GP1, who are the Italian website who got the quote out of Pecco, and I will link to the French website who was interviewing Herve, and I'll put all those links in the description so you can go through and read them for yourself, by the way. But anyway, where were we? The original question was about the accident between him and Viñales, which was answered by Pecco stating that it can be like that early in races with everyone so close together. People are all trying to get the best position. I'm paraphrasing here. But anyway, what he says to that part of the question is not the controversial bit. Like I said, you can go and read that for yourself. It's what comes after that. The Italian journalist asks what the solution could be to these dangerous moments early in races. And so Pecco says, by now everyone can win. There are no longer those 6 or 7 tenths difference that there were in the past between the factory bikes and the customer bikes. They served to limit accidents. The Fantastic Four, Rossi, Stoner, Lorenzo, Pedrosa, were the strongest riders ever, but they also had the factory bikes. The others didn't even have the technical potential to stay ahead. Now the level is extreme. Everything is pushed to the limit. Every rider has a chance to win. So I guess that's the first bit I want to break down. Herve's response to that part of the question when he's asked about it, and what was not my surprise when he benefited from from this system, he was able to have successful motorcycles in independent structures. To read that it would be nice if there were 6 or 7 tenths in turn decided by the engineers or manufacturers who are present on the grid in MotoGP, therefore castrate motorcycles in private teams of 6 or 7 tenths in turn. This is roughly the deficit he would like to see them impose in order to have fun between rich and powerful. He even quoted the 4 fantastic ones that were Rossi, Stoner, Lorenzo and Pedrosa at the time when factory motorcycles were much more efficient than motorcycles in independent teams, and it was a great situation. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that he said that he wanted to slow the bikes down by 6 or 7 tenths, which, as Herve's suggesting here, he said there was a difference of 6 or 7 tenths back then. By now, everyone can win. There are no longer 6 or 7 tenths different that there were in the past between the factory bikes and customer bikes. They serve to limit accidents. So it's all a question of safety for Pecco. That's what he's stating. Now, where I guess you can interpret it that way is towards the end of what Pecco's response, after he goes on to mention things like Augusto Fernandez and Bezzecchi's race pace and things like that. He does go on to say, in my opinion, we need to go back to having a bit of a gap between the factory riders and the customer ones, or find a solution to avoid certain accidents. Now, that's the bit I guess you could interpret as him saying he thinks that they should be castrated, as Herve put it, to be 6 or 7 tenths slower. Again, if we look back at what he's actually responding to, it is a question of safety. So in his opinion, we need to go back to a 6 or 7 tenth gap between the factory and satellite bikes in order to make the racing safer and avoid these incidents, or find a solution to avoid these incidents, or find a solution. He's not saying that that would be the solution. He's saying, or we need to find a solution. Now, look, I could be playing on words here and things like that, but I think it's an important point here. And look, that is the part of the quote that I guess can make it seem like he's suggesting they should make these bikes slower. Like the manufacturers or Dorna, I don't know, someone should. I'm not taking it like that. And the reason I'm not taking it like that, first of all, because he does say or find a solution. He doesn't say that that should be the solution. He just says in his opinion, it would be safer if that was the way it was. And it would be better if it was like that, like it was in the past. And the reason I'm choosing to take it that way is because when these riders go into these post-race interviews and things like that, it's the same day as the event. These questions, he doesn't have time to prepare for them. He just goes in there, he gets asked a question, and he gives his honest opinion on it. And the points that he makes aren't necessarily wrong. It would be safer if the bikes were further apart. It's the common, and there's another thing that Simon Patterson states in his article, that point exactly is the answer that we always give when we talk about smaller classes, about how to make them safer. The response always is, maybe we need to make a bigger spread between the bikes so they're not so close together all the time. Maybe the bikes need to be harder to ride so that the more talented guys can break away and the less talented guys can't keep up like they can now. And this is all in Simon Patterson's article. I was going to quote that part of his article to you as well there, but that's basically what he says. But Pecco, they get asked this question. He gives his honest opinion on what would make it safer and why he would like it to be that way, because it would be safer. And now I think that quote, without a response from Herve Poncharal, probably doesn't make headlines. Would you watch that and get up in arms and go post on Twitter? Probably not. Like most of us wouldn't. I might raise my eyebrow at it and then think about what he's actually saying and then go, yeah, okay, whatever. So here's where the controversy comes in for me, is in Poncharal's response. We've already quoted him there. I've already read to you what Poncharal has said in response. So that's not the full quote. He goes on, there's other questions and whatever. Like I said, I'll link to that full interview from that website in the description. You can go find it. But in that interview, before he gives that excerpt that I just read to you, he mentions that he's gone home, read that interview with Pecco, and then come back and given this response, translated from French to English. What I think about it is that as very often Sunday evening when I come home before bed, I haven't lived enough MotoGP. So I read everything that is written by national and international sites. And I came across an Italian site where there was an interview with Pecco Bagnaia, who talked a little bit about his problem with Maverick Vinales. And then I read that and I was very surprised on the part of the reigning world champion, someone who is respectable, whom I respect very much, for whom I have a lot of admiration, and who is always quite poised in his comments, to read an enormity, I could even say a huge bullshit, because Pecco Bagnaia, like any pilot, comes from Moto3. went through Moto 2 and arrived in MotoGP in an independent team that can be called private or satellite. It is called as it is desired, and he was happy to have a successful motorcycle that allowed him to get noticed. And then, as it evolved in this MotoGP category, he was offered a factory handlebar, which is a little bit the dream journey, which is a rough translation, and which any talented pilot wishes to have. And then he goes on to the quote that I've already read you. So he got home Sunday night. He read this interview. He says that he read this interview. Now, look, in the same way that I don't want to pile on Pecco, I don't want to pile on Herve here, where maybe we misspeak, or not even misspeak, but we don't quite get across what we're trying to say properly. I mean, I get to sit here, write down everything I want to say, follow my notes, edit the shit out of it, and sometimes I still don't get my point across properly, like I probably am not doing here. So, it's not easy when you just get asked these questions. You don't know these questions are coming. So it can be hard to answer them. But the fact that he's had a chance to read that interview, and that's how it made him feel, between reading it and doing this interview, he didn't put together what I've just put together, where it's like, well, maybe he didn't say he wanted them to be slowed down 7/10, because he didn't. He just didn't. And look, he looks like he's gone on a big rant here. I'm reading this. It's just a really long quote. You can come and read it. How can he still react that emotionally to it and take it that far? I think he has taken it out of context. And then this quote, this response from Herve is why I think drives a controversy, because he's coming out saying Pecco said that they need to castrate these bikes 6 or 7/10, and it's just not true. It's just not what he said. And look, maybe he's misinterpreted what Pecco said. It's possible. It's possible. Because everybody else, I was about to say because everybody else has, but I don't think everybody else has misinterpreted what Pecco said. I think people are reacting to what headlines are being put to them, what people are quoting, or Herve's quote. Because you're seeing headlines of Herve saying, this is bullshit, he's a crybaby, he just wants these to be docked 6 or 7/10 by the engineers so that he can go and win the race on his own. And I honestly think that's what because that's what I thought happened until I actually found the website, read the quote. And when you really read the quote, I don't interpret it that way. When we talk about safety in other classes, that's what we always say needs to happen. So when he says it here about MotoGP, he's getting savaged for it. And that's where I do agree with Simon Patterson's article here, where he says, look, that's not actually what he says. And like I said, you can go and read Simon Patterson's article. I suggest you do. And yeah, the point I was trying to make with, Pecco getting interviewed straight after the race, he's not watched anything back. He's just been asked about a safety thing. He's given his honest opinion, and we've all just, like, the level of, it's like almost a level of, to the point of hate that people are attacking Pecco here for being unsportsman, like in wanting other bikes slowed down. It's not even the point of the conversation he was having. The questions directed to him were about safety on the circuit, and that's the response he gave. He didn't say anything about because it makes it harder for him to win. Maybe in the back of his mind he's thinking that, but I'm not going to pretend to read the guy's mind and then use that as the context in which I interpret his words. So look, and I know, like I mentioned, this is probably not going to be a popular one for me, this opinion, because I've looked in the comment section of Simon Patterson's article. The comments on the YouTube video of him making the comment, even when it's right in front, like he's saying it right to your face, it's still being put down by most people in the comments as he's been a big baby, which is the nice way to put it. It's all anti-Pecco. The memes, and I love the meme pages, and they are quite funny. They are pretty funny. But they're all sort of, I know they're tongue-in-cheek when it comes to memes and stuff like that. There's no malicious intent in it. But they are all anti-Pecco. There's none of them anti-Herve, right? It's just like the level going at him for him giving an honest response at the end of a race on that day, question without notice. He's not had time to prepare for it, and we're fucking savaging him for it. And I'm not going to be on board with that, I don't think. It's not for me, that. And like I said, take this all with a pinch of salt, because my natural instinct is to go against the grain on this stuff. I'm a bit of a contrarian with this kind of stuff. I don't like, what's everyone saying? Are we all hating on this guy at the moment? You know what? I'm in his corner for this one. I'll defend him. And so, maybe that's just what I'm doing here. Maybe I have a bias towards that part of my personality to want to defend him in this situation. And maybe he is saying he wants the bike slowed down by 6 or 7/10. But when I read that back, trying to use, and you know what? You could argue that his logic is flawed there. You can't say that what he's saying is he wanted them bikes slowed down by 6 or 7 tenths. That's not what he said. It is just not what he said. And yeah, I just thought I'd put my 2 cents in on that one. And thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.